Deputy or Senator Ruane. Sorry, I should have called you.
No problem. Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your presentations today. I found them very informative and useful. I'd like to join with my colleagues just in relation and commenting on some of the language that's been used here today. One in particular I found very offensive as a woman and as a mother to actually make the assertion that a woman would arrive for a 20-week scan, practically find out the gender and say, no, it's a girl, I wanted a boy, and would go. I think it's absolutely a ridiculous and absurd view to have of women, and I found it very offensive, and I'd just like to put that on the record. I think that members should actually really research and come in here educated on the reasons that women have abortions before they make such comments like that. I have two questions. One of them is based really on the conversations today about a lot's coming up about rights and rights of the unborn and rights of the child. Can you just give a distinction and a little bit of background into the rights to life of a fetus, if there is any, and how they do or don't equate to a woman being a human rights holder? You know, we may as a society place value on the fetus, place value on access to fetal development and fetal care and fetal health if a woman is to proceed with a pregnancy, but that doesn't translate into human rights and equate to the same rights as the woman, and maybe you'll just elaborate a little bit on that. My next question is in relation to, Siobhan, in your presentation, it talks about how the committee needs to include the development of a legislative and regulatory framework that provides for access to abortion for reasons of, and then there's a list there. However, in practice, we are all aware of the many practical issues that arise when trying to allow for abortion in certain limited circumstances. How would you respond to the assertion that the only way for Ireland to fulfil its international obligations in this respect is to allow for terminations in early pregnancy on request, so that to meet our obligations we would have to allow not only for these circumstances but for abortion up to 12 weeks on request? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Did you want to go in, Professor Mullally, first?
Thank you. The first question relates to specifically the scope of the right to life, and I think we've said previously that there is nothing, of course, that prohibits protections of prenatal life, and in fact the Human Rights and Equality Commission in various submissions to UN bodies has spoken about the importance of the state strengthening prenatal care, maternal health policy, and providing better supports for pregnant women. So that has been part of various policy documents that we've produced and submissions to UN bodies. But what is the position under international human rights law is that a woman's rights under, for example, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to be free from inhuman and degrading treatment, her own right to life, to privacy, to non-discrimination, those rights cannot be undermined by priority given to the protection of prenatal life. So that has been the position of the UN Human Rights Committee, for example. So it is limited, and a woman's rights must also be respected. And in fact, the European Court of Human Rights in the OR and PNS cases involving Poland, in relation to findings of violations of both Article 8 on the right to private life, but also in relation to Article 3 in particular on prohibition on inhuman and degrading treatment, the court was very clear that although there was no European consensus in its view on the moment when human life began, that the court had an obligation in relation to supervision, and states had obligations to comply with the requirements of the European Convention on Human Rights. The second question was in
relation to the only way we can allow for
in relation
have access to abortion up to 12 weeks without restriction.
In our statement, we've set out the framework that we believe should be put in place, a legislative and regulatory framework, and that a number of areas should be addressed, including life, health, and socioeconomic circumstances, family circumstances. It's up to the legislature then, in our view, to deliberate further and arrive at a decision with regard to gestational limits, and we've set out approaches taken in different jurisdictions and how those have developed and the considerations that should be taken into account. Also, as we've said already, that certification requirements should not put in place further barriers for women and girls in terms of having access to abortions, and should not put in place conditions or situations where decisions cannot be made in a timely way, and that there must be effective access to abortion services. So it's within that context.
Thank you, Senator Ruane. You have 6 minutes altogether, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I had some planned questions today, but I'm just probably the most confused I've ever been in terms of trying to really understand some of the comments from Professor Binchy. I'm struggling to understand how you can advocate to this committee and ask this committee to get real about the inherent right to life that fetal life has, or the unborn child, but then say that you don't think the right to travel should be taken out of the Constitution. So what fetuses and unborn children actually have an inherent right to life, and which one should be protected? You just replied to Deputy O'Connell that you don't believe the right to travel should be taken out. So you're saying that some people should be able to travel. So in reality, it's quite an elitist view of an inherent right to life, and actually only those in minority groups and, you know, what unborn children actually have that right if you're not going to protect it at all costs. So I think it just makes the whole argument incoherent, really, in terms of that inherent right to life. The presentation started off in premises. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3 and the conclusion. From the very offset, as a philosophy graduate of logic, premise 1 fell down when you said that fetal life and human life have an equal right to life. So everything else fell from thereafter for me. I think what you wrote in the presentation in relation to disability, I would actually agree on, right down to the last sentence. And why I would agree with the first part of what you wrote on disability is the right to life of people with disabilities, or the child with disabilities, or the young girl with a disability that actually needs to access abortion and actually can't possibly travel in some situations due to their disability. So in fact, when you talk about the rights of someone with a disability, you're not talking about fetal life and a possible disability they will have. You're talking about a person in the world. And maybe, Christina, you might be able to elaborate a little bit on that in relation to a human rights context, in relation to how if the unborn child has a significant fetal abnormality that is not likely to result in death before or shortly after birth, how can the state's duty to combat discrimination against disabled people be balanced against its duty to ensure women access to abortion? And are they comparable in the sense that when we talk about discrimination against disabled people, we are in fact not talking about fetal life? Thank you.
Who are you directing your question at?
Christina.
Thank you. Ms. Santos.
Yes. Human rights bodies, as I said in my presentation, have recommended that countries ensure access to abortion in cases of severe or fetal impairment. So they go back and forth, not always consistent. But if you look back at the recommendations that go back in time, they've almost always been severe, and lately they're saying fatal, and sometimes they say severe or fatal, because it's very hard, as I said, for a legislator or a committee member to decide for a woman how that's going to impact her. These are really difficult decisions. They're always wanted pregnancies. They get the determination very late. It's very, very difficult decisions to make, and women make those oftentimes with a very heavy heart. And I think we have to keep that real and see that those are not easy decisions for women to make, and they're very individual decisions. And like I said, they're usually wanted pregnancies. I mean, the treaty bodies have never said to eliminate the fetal impairment grounds in a law. They have never said that they should be eliminated. And the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability recently issued a general comment on women and girls with disabilities. And in that general comment recommends that states should ensure access to sexual and reproductive health services the same as any other women, taking into consideration their disability and what their needs are. It never addressed the issue of abortion on grounds of fetal impairment, and I think that says a lot in their first general recommendation on women with disabilities. And I think the best way to address the problem of discrimination against persons with disabilities is to address the underlying discrimination. Why is this happening? Society needs to make steps to make life, the individual's life, but also the family life of the parents easy. There should be benefits given. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but there should be benefits, social support, educational support, and I think I think Ireland, it's about time to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I think it will really help you in terms of setting some real policies straight on helping persons with disabilities in this country, and I think that's the best way to address it. It's not going, restricting abortion on impairment grounds is not going to limit access to abortion.
Thank you.
And in some countries, I just want to say, in some countries don't have explicit fetal impairment exceptions, but they read health exceptions very broadly to include, any sort of health issue.
Just a brief